Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for links to some great online retailers. There's also individual links for knives that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a little bit of a different video to share with you guys. Today I'm going to be going over every last little thing that I look for in terms of, quality, I guess, on a brand new folding knife. Now, we all have our own little nitpicky system, but I'm going to share with you guys what I consider to be a flaw, and what I will and won't send a knife back for, and what just makes me feel really, really good about a purchase. Sorry, I'm walking around here a little bit. This is my brand new XM18 3.5 inch, and what I usually do and what I probably will still do is I do a video on it. I talk about it, but this is essentially a variation of a knife that I used to own. This is a 3.5 inch XM18. It is the DLT Trading exclusive Fullard Spear. It just doesn't have a flipper tab. It's a non-flipper version. I will provide links for this knife and other Hinder knives down in the description where you guys can go check that stuff out if you want to. But yeah, the only difference between this and the other one that I had was that this one doesn't have a flipper tab. So there's a bunch of great stuff about it, but you guys I've talked your ears off about Hinder knives, so I thought I might do something different. Now, this knife is not stock. It's got the titanium scale on it, and it has some other Hinder gear and stuff like that. The reason that I like Hinder knives so much, aside from the aesthetic and the design, is that everything seems to fit together really well. Everything is consistently checking all of my boxes in terms of the little tiny things that I look for, right? So number one, they generally come exactly the way that I want them to. If there's one thing off here or there, it's something I can adjust or change myself to get it the way that I want. And that's because of their consistent quality. And then if I want to add parts, custom parts that were also made by Hinder that you can buy separately, they always fit. My titanium scale is very old. It is years old, and it still fits. That thing was made sometime between Generation 3 and Generation 4 actually I think it would have been Generation 4. It was made sometime around then, so at least 2 years ago, and it is still fitting their knives today, which means the knives are to the same spec, and it fits perfectly, and it looks exactly the same as the other side, right? That's why I enjoy these so much. So, anyways, let me go ahead and, real quick, let me say thank you to my patrons. Thanks so much to all my generous patrons for supporting me right now. If you'd like to get your hands on some of these cool stickers, as well as some other stickers that are not being shown here and some other benefits, there is, of course, a link down in the description. Your support would absolutely mean the world to me. So anyways, the very first thing, we're going to go over every last little thing that I look for right when I get a brand new knife. Stuff that, it's okay. Stuff that kind of bothers me and stuff that, oh, that's definitely, nope, that's going back. We're going to talk about all that stuff, and I'm going to tell you guys exactly what I think. I get a lot of people messaging me and going, is this a problem? Should I send it back? So I figured a video to address this stuff. Now, keep in mind, guys, a lot of this is going to depend on the design of the knife, right? We're looking at a titanium frame lock here. We're also looking at a knife that costs a lot of money. At base, this is a $425 knife. With all the custom parts I've got on this guy, it's somewhere around the $700 mark. Now, right? So kind of, you're going to have to gauge this a little bit towards whatever you paid for your knife. But generally speaking, these are things that I expect from every knife. The first thing that I check for is centering. The very first thing that I check for is blade centering. Now, this guy's perfect, but it came perfect. If it came perfect, it will likely go back to perfect if you put things together in the right order, right? And if you want to know about how to center a blade, I do have a video on how to center a blade in my discussion and controversy section, so you can check that out. But a good sign is that it is centered. Next up, very next thing, and by the way, if it's just ever so slightly off, just a little bit of a turn on the pivot, it should go back to normal, right? If it's not perfectly centered and you've got a knife that costs less than $50, yeah, I get it, it's frustrating. But if it's not rubbing, it's really not that big of a deal. If you paid $425 for a Hinder and it's rubbing, try to tighten the pivot, or a knife that is, in the same caliber. Try to tighten the pivot a bit. See if you can get it to go back. If you can, you just need some blue Loctite in there. It's not that big of a deal. Don't send your knife back just because the pivot came loose, because that's going to happen. Right? Now, if it's rubbing and you've got the pivot tightened all the way down, there's something wrong with your knife. Send it back, right? The next thing I check for, once I got the centering the way that I wanted, or if it came centered, is the action. Does the action feel smooth, right? Now, if I'm paying $1,000 for a Shirogorov, I expect it to drop shut. If I pay $50 for a Civivi, do I expect it to drop shut? No. But do I expect it to deploy? Yes. I expect it to deploy conveniently, without grind, right? There's a difference between, a pivot that's just, it's got a little bit of a sluggish action. Like, for example, the action on a Chris Reeve knife is intentionally hydraulic, but not super duper quick, right? Not at least not till they break in. Same thing with like a Medford or knives like that. They're intentionally like that. A tight action that's meant to break in or as part of the design is different than a grindy action. If it feels like there's debris in there, metal shavings or something, right? If it feels like something's grinding or dragging or squeaking, right? It might be an issue. Now, this depends on your warranty. Some companies don't want you to take your knife apart, so you might want to check with them first. But if you, number one, either feel completely and totally confident in taking the knife apart and you don't really care, okay, you're going to do what you're going to do, or if it's okay, it might be a situation if the knife does not have proprietary hardware where you can just take it apart and take a look in there. Down at the very bottom of my description, I have that lightweight nano oil stuff. Get yourself some cleaning solution and some ear swabs and things like that. Get in there and clean the internals out, right? Use some of that nano oil, put it back together. A lot of times that will clear the problem. But if the knife persists, then it may have if the problem persists even after putting it back together, then it may have been an issue. Now, this is why I always say check with the manufacturer first and tell them, hey, here's what's going on. Is it okay for me to take this apart, see if I can, figure this out? And if they say yeah, then go ahead. If they say no, then send it back to them, because you might put yourself in a situation where it's going to cost you money if you put it back together and they didn't want you, to mess with it in the first place, right? So check with them first. I understand, new knife, you just want it to work, you want to enjoy it, you want to feel good about the money you spent. It's worth taking the time, right? So check for the action. In this case, this thing had just beautiful action. My opinion of a hinderer with good action is one that is very nearly fall shut. I don't necessarily care if my knives are completely and totally fall shut. I care that it's nice and smooth based on how much money I paid for it. And then I can get it back into the handle conveniently. Just about how you saw that right there. I will actually intentionally tighten the pivot to get exactly that type of action. I'll get the blade center the way that I want, but I want exactly that. I don't necessarily want a guillotine. I want it to be controlled. Because if I'm going to use it or if I'm going to sit around and fidget with it, either way, I don't need that blade falling down on my fingers. But, do what you want. So, if the action is to your liking, whatever. Now, this is on a frame lock, right? I checked this on a liner lock. I'll at least test the lock on a number of different knives. We can get some different ones out here. We can get the compression lock out here. We can get the axis lock out here. And we'll get a liner lock out here. Essentially, what I'm checking for next is lockup. Essentially, the engagement, whether or not there is stick and whether or not there is play. So in this case, this is about as perfect as it could possibly be on a hinderer. This thing is locking up at about 25%. There is no stick. Literally no stick whatsoever. That is wonderful. Periodically, I feel some stick. And people question, ask me about this all the time. It has lock stick. Should I send it back? A little tiny bit. Let me show you this, guys. My XM24. My XM24 came with a little bit of lock stick, and it's actually still barely working this out. But I know that it takes a little bit, and it doesn't really bother me all that much. Here's a lockup on the Dark Horse. A little bit later, but that's fine. This one's coming in at about 30-35% or so. Ever so slight. Here, ready? Just a little tiny bit. Not really that big of a deal. It's easy to disengage, especially if I get my thumb much closer to the point of contact and just push it over. Say maybe, as far as the worst that I've ever felt my entire life, that's maybe 10% of that. That does not bother me at all, and it shouldn't bother you. Let it work itself out. That thing has gotten better and better and better over time. Eventually, the lock bar will wear in. Whatever contact point is causing the friction will smooth out. It'll be just fine. If you find yourself unable to disengage the liner or frame lock without the use of a tool, you have a problem. Anything else, you do not have a problem. Just be patient with it. It'll be just fine. Late lockup. What is early? What is late? You can define that for yourself. What's important is that there's enough surface contact for the tang of the blade to safely interact with the frame lock. And that means you should not be feeling any slip. I don't care what anybody tells you. Up and down, meaning moving the blade this way and this way, there should be no slip. You should not see this lock bar moving at all. You should not feel clicking up and down on a frame lock especially. Well, frame lock and liner lock, any up and down clicking, that's bad. I don't care what anybody says. I don't like that. Send it back. You should not be feeling that up and down play. Side to side play. I don't like to feel it on anything, but occasionally I do. And most of the time, it can be fixed by simply tightening down the pivot, right? And again, use the centering trick, the video that I've got. You can get the action the way that you want, right? Ideally, the knife should lock up, in my opinion, on a frame lock, the knife should lock up somewhere between 20 and 50%. If it is less than 20%, I think that's a little bit dangerous. I've seen a lot of pictures of very early hinderers where the lock bar is like right here. If your lock bar is right there, that's dangerous. I honestly wouldn't feel comfortable about that. You know, if you're going to go out and use this thing, if it slips even the slightest bit, it could disengage on you. 20 to 50% is what I consider just fine if it's brand new. Some designs will lock up later than 50%, like a frame lock. You know, right when you get them, it's just part of the design. Does that mean it's bad? No. The only time it's bad is if the frame lock is locking up so late that it's actually almost contacting or actually contacting the other side. Now, why is that bad? Even if it's solid then, the thing's going to wear in. The liner locks and frame locks, all locks wear in. It's just the product of friction over time. If it wears all the way over to the other side and it keeps wearing in, essentially those surfaces, you know, those faces between the tang of the blade and the frame lock are going to wear away, and that's going to create a little bit of a gap. And then guess what? You've got rock. And you don't want that. That can be dangerous. So that's a problem, right? Yeah, that's what I check for there on lockup. So I hope that was all clear. The next thing that I do, and you know, same thing, liner lock here on the Para 3. You know, sometimes on these compression locks you get a little bit of stick, a little bit of play. In my experience, it all eventually goes away. My PM2, this thing used to stick like crazy when I got it. No stick whatsoever. Nothing. Shaman used to do that too. Benchmade axis lock. Truthfully, most Benchmade axis locks, or in this case the Ritter Hogue and the whatever they call this, the Able lock. A lot of times you'll get some play, and sometimes it'll lock up and you won't get any play, right? You don't want up and down play on the axis lock. You got a little teeny tiny bit of side to side play. Usually it can be adjusted out, right? All that still applies. Just essentially, you know, you're just going to have to kind of cater that to whatever system it is that you're looking at. God, there's just debris everywhere. I don't know what it is about this background. The next thing that I do is I look over for the fitment of everything. And again, you're going to have to, you know, take this, you know, depending on what it is that you're looking at. I guess we should get out the Civivi Praxis, which is, I thought was right up front, but apparently it isn't. Yeah, there it is. So, excellent fit and finish for a budget knife. It's good contrast, I guess. All the way around, you know, whether you're looking at a $50 knife or a $400 knife, there shouldn't be gaps around the pivots. There shouldn't be gaps around the hardware. There should be no fraying on the inside. There should be no stripping on the inside of those screws. All of the little pieces should line up. There shouldn't be anything, you know, any wonky gaps, anything sticking out. Everything should look the same on both sides. Again, depending on the design, right? There shouldn't be a bunch of, you know, there shouldn't be excess marks or like jagged areas, right? If you get it and the pocket clips looks all dinged up on one side, you got all these nasty scratches, like basically like it was being thrown around on a table during assembly, or maybe it was dropped, right? Yeah, honestly, whether I'm paying $50 or if I'm paying $1,000 for a knife, I don't want to see that on the knife at all. I don't care if it, you know, if you, I mean, a lot of people make the argument, well, it's going to be a user, so I don't really care. And hey, if that's the case with you, more power to you. Because yeah, that's true. If you're going to use it, it's going to get scratches on it. But I think it's the principle of buying a new product, buying something that's brand new. I expect it to arrive in new and unused condition. If you're buying from the secondary market, it's the secondary market, right? You got to work that out with the person you're buying from. But On a brand new knife, I don't like to see that. So I look for all that stuff. I'm going to make sure that that is the case with every last bit of hardware on it, right? I like to check the pocket clip. Honestly, I don't like pocket clips that stick up past the frame to where if I'm pushing on it, it goes click, 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 because there's space in between the pocket clip and the frame. If that's the case, I'll pull the clip off and bend it, right? Yeah, I want it to fit. I don't want the pocket clip to have play in any direction, right? Obviously, pull up, it's going to. But left and right, I don't want any play on the pocket clip, anything like that. But yeah, all those little teeny tiny things you should be checking for. And I do comb over this stuff, probably more so than the average person needs to. But you know, it's just that's my system. That's how I feel good about the thing, right? I mean, there's a period of time I've talked about this, the honeymoon phase with a knife. You check it over, right? And it's to your liking and you love it. How long it takes between the time that you're still loving it and the honeymoon, that's kind of a bad term, right? Because the implication there is that you're only loving it before you start using it. You guys understand what I mean by the honeymoon phase, right? I'm not going to take responsibility for the implications there. It's just a term. But yeah, and then you can enjoy it for being brand new and fresh and whatever, and then you can use it when you're ready to use it. Last thing that I check for, I mean, like there's a million other little teeny tiny things. Some people take their knives completely apart and they have to see the internals and they have to know, you know, and they have to tweak it. Truthfully, guys, I don't like to tweak my knife. If everything's perfect and everything feels good, unless I'm going to add parts, like in the case of the Hinderer, I'm going to add that titanium scale to it. I just am. It's what I'm going to do every time, so I'm going to take it apart, right? But in the case of the Praxis, you know, I didn't buy this brand new. Somebody gave it to me. Knife that I purchased brand new, okay, well, this knife was given to me. The SOCOM Elite, I have never taken that thing apart. You know why? Because it works just fine. It was perfect from the factory. I don't need to know that everything I don't have to physically see that all the internals are working correctly because they seem to be working correctly. They feel correct. All of my other little things on my checklist, right? Thumbs up. So I don't have to take it apart because I don't want to mess something up. Now, even if a really good knife, if you take it apart, put it back together, it's usually the case that if it's made well, it'll just go back together and be just fine. But I don't even want to risk it, right? It's working. I want to let it break in, right? It's to factory spec. Everything's fine, so I just want to leave it that way. So that's my take on that. Don't take it apart unless something goes wrong or it's time to clean it, which will inevitably be the case down the road. But initially from the factory, if everything's fine, just I understand some people have to know. Some people have to know if the cat's actually in the box. Yeah, just let it break in naturally. It's going to achieve its best results that way. The last thing that I check for, and it's a little nitpicky thing, I hate detent lash. I hate detent lash so much. There's nothing that bothers me more than detent lash. Now let me stress this, guys. Detent lash, you might be wondering, what the heck does that mean? Here, I got a knife that's got some, and it's a product of the design. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with it, but I'll use this knife as an example because it's visible. This new CJRB with the recoil lock, it operates much like the Axis lock, and I'll get an Axis lock out here to use as an example. Because of how the Axis bar interacts with the tang of the blade, there's this space down at the bottom where it's just got movement before it actually hits that point where it's supposed to fly out, right? It wiggles a little bit. Same with the CJRB. I can actually show you with the flipper tab. See what I mean? It moves around a little bit. That's a product of this design. It's like, but you know, that's a part of the design. On a liner lock or frame lock that utilizes a detent ball, that ball rests into a little hole, and that connection essentially snaps the blade back into place. I do not want to feel any movement whatsoever. Why? I don't know. If there is movement, does it affect the utilitarian potential of the design? Not really. I suppose you could make an argument that it might cause the blade to, in an extreme circumstance, deploy prematurely, or when you don't want it to. That'd be pretty rare. You'd have to be, running, and the knife would have to be basically tip, if I'm carrying this thing tip down and I'm running and it's, there's a lot of room in the pocket, right? If I'm sprinting, then maybe, yeah, then maybe that could happen. But I basically don't want to feel that because I want everything to be solid and in place and not rattling or shaking around on a brand new design. I don't want to shake a knife and hear anything. I don't want to hear rattling at all. Both of these knives, perfect. Watch. This thing costs $45, and they can do that right. No system with a detent ball should have any rattle or play. To me, it's just, it's a sign that care was taken, even on that tiny little level, making sure that that detent ball is seated just right to be able to deploy the blade properly. Detent strength and all that stuff is really important, but it also depends on your individual preferences, right? The detent ball is seated correctly so that it, there's enough force to be built up, right? If it's a flipper or a thumb stud opener, you can build up the appropriate amount of force to deploy the blade, and then it deploys, smooth and easy and quickly. And then it's also the tension on the lock bar in relationship with the contact between the detent ball and the face of the blade. It still allows for smooth action on the way back down, but it's positioned correctly and the hole is designed correctly, or at least fits perfectly with the detent ball, so that when the blade finally comes to rest, it snaps back into the blade or into the handle perfectly like this. Perfect. That is how that should be. I find it inexcusable on a design, any design of any price range that utilizes detent ball where there's play. Again, it's probably not going to affect you in a utilitarian sense. I just don't like that. I don't want it to rattle. I don't like knives that rattle when I shake it. Now, OTFs and stuff like that, they're going to rattle, right? Sometimes assisted knives with torsion bars, the torsion bar is going to rattle a little bit like that. But on a manual liner lock or frame lock, I don't want to hear anything. That is a personal preference of mine. Both of these knives, at the low end of $45, what is this? And this $425 Hinderer, right? They both just perfect. They have all of that stuff. I keep knives like this. Knives that are, that fit my ergonomic preferences and my size preferences, that have, aesthetic, just designs that aesthetically, appeal to me, right? And all the little tiny things. And I found that these knives tend to stay solid over time because everything was seated correctly in the first place. I've never had to take apart that Praxis, and I have used it. It doesn't look like it. I keep my knives clean. People always tell me, you haven't used that, it's totally clean. It's because I clean my knives. And because you're looking at this through the lens of a camera, so little tiny things like, some of these little hairline marks. I'm trying to give you guys a good example. The truth is yeah, some of these little marks here, these friction marks, things like that, not going to show up as well. And truthfully, no, I haven't taken this out and thrown it across concrete or anything like that because I use my knives for normal knife tasks. Not coming down on anybody who, will take their knife out of their pocket and set it down in concrete and put it back in. Anyways, getting off topic here. I found that these knives, with all of these little teeny tiny things that I check for, and, I check for them because the knives that have all of these little boxes checked seem to hold up better over time. I can continuously deploy them, use them, cut with them, right? And everything just stays in place. This, my system does not, you don't have to take my system as law. This is just the stuff that I look for. It depends on what you want from your knife, the design, what you're used to, how much you're paying, stuff like that. You kind of have to, cater your expectations to what you're paying, and then realistically think, what am I going to use this for? Is this thing that, perhaps I mentioned something that you didn't previously consider could be a flaw or was a flaw, right? Consider what you're going to use the knife for, whether or not you cared about it in the first place, whether or not that thing that I mentioned has affected you in the past, right? And, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, well, I've got other knives that I guess have had those issues, right? And I've continued to use them, and they've always treated me well, then don't put a lot of stock into it. This is just me. This is just how I am. I think that's pretty much all I can say here. We may at some point do a full video on the Hinderer XM18, but for now, I thought this was a good way to talk about it a little bit. I'm just very, very happy with this one. All of the little teeny tiny things that I want are there. and it's aesthetically pleasing, and it has the fidget factor and all the little tiny things that I want, right? And so it was fun to do a video on it. But anyways, guys, I think that's going to be pretty much it. If you enjoyed this video or got anything from it or found it at least mildly interesting, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.